Back in the ancient days of 1985, a small underground gaming company known as Nintendo released a gaming console called the NES. Now, the NES was a super cool console that had lots of great games, like Super Mario Bros. 2, Mega Man 2, Modern Warfare 2. Wait, but you know what game it didn't have? Fallout New Vegas. Why? Well, the technology back then sucked. I'm pretty sure this cool rock I have has more processing power than the NES.
Shit.
So the NES doesn't have Fallout New Vegas. Or does it? What if we could run Fallout New Vegas on an NES?
Fuck.
Well, that didn't work. So unfortunately, I can't run Fallout New Vegas on an NES. So, I guess instead, I'll just have to play it on a PC. With an NES controller. Now, I know what you're probably wondering. How the fuck do you use an NES controller with Fallout New Vegas? Well, there's this program called Xbox 360 Controller Emulator, which basically tricks whatever game you're playing into thinking it's being played with an Xbox 360 controller, even if it is very clearly not. By using this program, you can basically use whatever controller you want as long as it hooks up to your computer. And if you're a longtime New Vegas stan like me, you might remember that Mitten Squad used this same program in his video on beating New Vegas with a Guitar Hero controller. But this video is going to be a lot harder than that one, because of the numbers. A Guitar Hero controller has at least 15 distinct inputs. That includes the buttons, the strumming, the whammy bar, etc. You know how many an NES controller has? 8. Yeah, just 8. This is of course a far cry from the amount of inputs on an Xbox 360 controller, which is 25. So how the hell did I beat a game with less than 1/3 of the amount of controls required? The answer? Trial and error and lots of pain. Before I start though, I need to confess that this video is not what it seems. You see, this video is originally going to be Mitten Squad style, like my earlier skeleton video. Well, guess what? One night I was fucking around and accidentally deleted the footage for this video. But I still had this. The hand cam. The only proof that I did this was some shitty ass phone video that was meant to be in the corner of the screen. So I put this video on hold for a while until I realized that I don't actually need the footage. So if you're wondering why some of the footage in this video looks like this, well, there's your answer. So I started the game, and once I got the software working, I started testing out different control schemes. But I quickly realized something. To play the game, I need to be able to look around in all directions. But there are also menus that I need to navigate, such as the one where I pick my tag skills and traits. And to navigate those, I need to be able to move in all directions also. So, I need to be able to look in all directions and move in all directions. Well shit, that's all 8 buttons. I don't have any other buttons left, so I can't interact or open the PipBoy, so I guess that means I can't do it. I cannot beat Fallout New Vegas with only an NES controller. Or can I? Because I realized that using the Xbox 360 controller emulator program, I pretty much have 2 different control schemes. And using this different control scheme, I could have one button on the controller bound to multiple things at one time. So I could have A on the controller press A and move the stick forward. But that's the limit. I can only have one button do 2 things at once. But still, I could effectively do more than 8 things with only 8 buttons. Realizing this, I changed my controls a lot of times over the first hour of gameplay through trial and error. And by the way, the first hour took place almost entirely within Doc Mitchell's house. Yes, getting out of Doc Mitchell's fucking house was challenging. It was just pure trial and error, trying to get a control scheme that would work. This multiple button thing may have saved the run, but it also created a lot of problems that will become more and more apparent as I go on. But I eventually did find a control scheme that carried me through the game. Here it is. Look is bound to the D-pad, move is bound to the other 4 buttons, with the other 4 buttons also opening my PipBoy, opening VATS, interacting, and attacking. If you thought this control scheme was already convoluted, it's about to get a lot more convoluted, because there are certain menus where I have to press specific buttons on the Xbox 360 controller that can't be rebound. For example, if I try to use the Vigor Tester in Doc Mitchell's house, it tells me that I need to use RT, and that can't be changed in-game. But I can use the program, because there's nothing stopping me from binding my buttons to literally whatever. So I can tell it, hey, whenever I press the start button, what I'm actually pressing is RT and moving the stick forward. And that works. So here's a completed diagram of the control scheme. The top one is the actions that I perform in-game, and the bottom one are the buttons that New Vegas thinks I'm pressing. I thought it'd be easier for me to explain it this way because, again, I basically have 2 control schemes. So finally, I can talk about the fucking game. And you know a challenge is hard when you spend 5 minutes talking about other shit before you really get into the game. My original strategy for this run was to use whatever the best weapons I could find were, and use VATS so I didn't have to aim. Until I realized that using VATS for the entire run was gonna be fucking horrible. So my strategy shifted to just using melee. But I still had a pretty bog standard character build, and let me tell you, thank God I had 6 strength, otherwise I wouldn't have finished this run. My weapon of choice was the machete, and I went through the game just doing all the normal shit you do. Rescuing Deputy Beagle, quests at the Mojave Outposts, you know, normal New Vegas shit I'm not going to go into too much detail with. But it was very early on around this time that I realized the massive side effects of doing multiple things with one button. It sounds like a really good solution on paper, but in practice, it's a fucking nightmare. Because every time you're trying to do something, you're simultaneously doing something else that you don't want to do. This literally affects everything about the game, and it makes it so that you're not really in control. It's like you have half control and you're fighting with the game for the other half. Just to put this in perspective, the control is so bad that using this, menus are difficult to navigate. Fucking menus. Menus are an actual threat to me completing the run. Now let's go back to this diagram. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed an issue with this. Namely, how the fuck do I use the PipBoy? Well, I found a method using this control scheme, and it's so fucking annoying, but it works. So the PipBoy has 3 menus that have 6 or so sections each. I don't really know what to call them. So whenever I press start on the controller, it moves to the next menu, but it will also move to the next section of the next menu. So by spamming the button, I can navigate to my weapons, my aid items, whatever. This is incredibly janky, and I don't have time to get into every stupid thing that would happen with menus like this, but imagine the same level of janky controls for every single other menu in the game. And you've got a good idea what it's like to play Fallout New Vegas with an NES controller. But the real hurdle of this run was the combat. Oh my god, the combat. I had attack bound to the same button as move left. So every time I tried to attack, I was moving left. This actually did help me in some scenarios. I developed a strategy of holding in the button and moving the camera right around the enemy. But most of the time, I would just have to baby tap the button so it would only move left a little bit. The other thing that made the combat so bad was that I could only move my camera at a fixed rate. Normally with a stick, you can move at different rates by only holding in the stick halfway or whatever. But I didn't have a stick. I had a D-pad. And I couldn't really increase the look sensitivity because I had no way to pause the game, and if I increased it, it would be harder for me to do everything else I needed with my camera, like looking around and picking up items. That meant that in combat, my enemies were literally running circles around me as I tried to catch up and hit them with my slow-moving camera. And because I was traveling the road between Good Springs and Novak, I was getting into a lot of combat situations that were hard for me to avoid. But the worst part of all was that because I couldn't pause, I couldn't save, which meant that I was fully reliant on autosaves, at least for the first few hours, which I'll get into later. But for the time being, if I was traveling the road and I died, I would go back to whenever I last exited a building, which meant that this section took forever. Okay, so around the time I got to Novak, something happened. My controller started malfunctioning. What happened is that every time I would press the button I was holding in to move, it would alternate between being pressed and being not pressed, as if questioning its existence. I thought, well, I've had this controller for a while, it must just be giving out with age. So I used my extra controller. And within 20 minutes, the same issue happened with the other controller. This pissed me off. But I realized that I still had 3 buttons that weren't malfunctioning. So I switched the B and the select button of the control scheme and continued on. This also had another weird side effect. For some reason, after this change, every time I would press start and select at the same time, the game would immediately alt-tab. This did actually help me because it gave me a way of getting to the pause menu, meaning I could save whenever I wanted to. But it also brought combat to an absolute standstill, because those buttons correspond to move forward and attack now. So every time I would try to move forward and attack at the same time, my game would alt-tab and I would have to use the mouse to get back into the game, which made this already agonizing run take even longer. Okay, now I have a question for you. How long does it take you to get to Vegas from Goodsprings? If you're a speedrunner, the answer is like 2 minutes. But for me, the answer is about an hour and 30 minutes if I'm going the intended way and doing the quest objectives between Goodsprings and Vegas. Well, guess what? With the NES controller, it took me 3.5 hours. And that's not even counting the hour of trial and error in Doc Mitchell's house. So technically, it took me 4.5 hours. I can't stress this enough. Everything during this challenge takes forever. The sluggish combat means dying over and over. Oh, you haven't entered a building to get another autosave in 10 minutes? Well, go back! Okay, so once I made it to Vegas, I killed Benny and started down the path of doing Yes Man's bullshit. Which meant I had to contact the tribes, and by comparison to the traveling, this actually wasn't that bad. I YOLO'd my way past the howitzers to contact the boomers, I did the first part of the Brotherhood quest to contact the Brotherhood. Also, I yoinked the super sledge, don't tell anybody. The one that really took a while was the Great Khans, just because of the walk to get there and the amount of fiends and geckos between me and them. Overall, this section between me getting in Vegas and the endgame took only around an hour and 30 minutes, which is a fucking joke compared to the amount of time it took for me to get to Vegas in the first place. But around this time, I actually got something that helped me a lot. I'd leveled up and picked the Super Slam perk. If you don't know about this perk, basically, whenever you hit someone with a melee weapon, it gives them a random chance to just be knocked on their ass. This was really useful because it gave me something that I sorely needed in combat. Time. While the enemy is knocked down, I can get hits on them without having to worry about them running around and being out of reach of my sluggish ass controls. This perk would end up carrying the fucking run for me. Okay, now I can finally talk about the most interesting part of the run. The Battle of Hoover Dam. Now the battle was easy at first. It only took me about 20 minutes to get to Lanius. But then I realized something. I didn't have 100 speech. I don't know how I fucked up my leveling, but I didn't have 100 speech, which meant I couldn't bluff my way out of fighting Lanius. I had to fight him. There was no choice. This fight took me around 30 minutes. It was really fucking difficult, and I died so many times. But once I got a couple of lucky knockdowns and hits, it was glorious.
Yes! Lanius! He's dead! I did it! I fucking did it! I fucking did it! Yes! With an NES controller! I beat Legatlanius with a fucking NES controller! Yes! Yes! I did it! Yes! 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 Oh my god! Oh my god! Yes!
I had just beaten Fallout New Vegas with a fucking NES controller, and I was ecstatic. And that was the end. So let me try and find a conclusion to this. Okay, so I mean this when I say this. This was the hardest challenge I have ever done. It was harder than RAR and the legendary Bloatfly combined. Because those challenges were like trying to run a really fast 100-meter dash. You may have to try it 1,000 times, but it's simple and smaller, so you'll eventually get it. But this is like running a marathon while the entire track is submerged in a lake of molasses. It's not only difficult, but slow, grueling, mentally taxing, and many, many, many other adjectives that I could come up with. But it's over, and I don't have to talk about it anymore. And I'm gonna be honest, guys. I don't think I'm gonna be doing a challenge run that's harder than this, at least for a while. Because I just can't keep ramping up the difficulty like this anymore. It is just too much for me. So, at least for now, that's where me doing New Vegas challenge runs ends. I'm the Logmuffin, and as always, I'll see you up ahead.